Hey everyone, it's Zach. Remember to tune into The Last Dance, the behind-the-scenes look at the Chicago Bulls dynasty of the 90s. The series continues this coming Sunday at 9 Eastern on ESPN. Listen to the wrap-up podcast hosted by Jalen Rose and David Jacoby, immediately following the broadcast, which is presented by State Farm and brought to you by AT&T. You can find Jalen and Jacoby wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast, live from a basement where I am quarantined currently. And I am thrilled to be joined by the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, but really right now, more of a reserve shooting guard for the 1997-98 Chicago Bulls. Steve Kerr, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing, Zach?
I'm hanging in. The Last Dance, it's finally here. We all watched it last night. Had you seen it before? Have you seen any of it?
No. You know, the people from ESPN sent me the links a couple weeks ago, and I just chose not to watch it. I just kind of wanted to watch it with everybody else. And I wanted something to look forward to on TV. I've missed sports so much. So I just saved it, and we all watched it last night after dinner. It was really, really fun.
So before we get into the two Utah finals, which I'm just dying to talk to you about, let's get into a couple of things that were in the first two episodes. How widely known was it amongst the players, maybe everybody knew and I just had forgotten, that Jerry Krause literally said to Phil, you could go undefeated and you're still not coaching next year?
I think it was basically known. I mean, I had forgotten that exact comment, but the whole team understood what was happening from the very beginning of the season. There was a headline in the paper, the Chicago Tribune, this will be Phil's last season coaching. And that was the quote from Jerry. And if you think about it, I mean, imagine that in context of today's NBA where, yeah, that just doesn't happen. And so and especially with Michael Jordan on the team and, everyone knew Michael and Phil were tied at the hip. So the whole thing seemed kind of insane, but it became our rallying cry. Phil used it wisely as a motivating factor, and here we are talking about it 22 years later with the same title that Phil gave it, during that training camp.
The behind the scenes footage is clearly going to be amazing of the training room, the locker room in Paris, just hanging out before games, and Jordan belittling Krause every chance he gets. I felt very conflicted watching it because it's funny, and B, it's also mean. And I wonder, did anyone on the team ever say to Michael, hey man, he gets it. That's like your 400th short joke of the year. Maybe cut it out. Or was there so much hostility and you just sort of were like, well, this is just how it's going to be?
Well, I think everybody had their own Jerry Krause moment. And everybody was upset with him in one way or another. He just had that skill somehow of pissing everybody off. And but it really got uncomfortable. But I wasn't going to say anything to Michael. Nobody was going to say anything to Michael. It was that's one of those things where you kind of leave that one alone. Where this is Michael Jordan, and he gets to say whatever he wants. This is his team, and he's got his own beef with Jerry. So we weren't going to step in, but it was definitely uncomfortable.
The other thing, it's really amazing, even though it's 22 years later, to see Scottie and then Phil and then Michael react with such unvarnished honesty about Scottie having the surgery right before the season. And Scottie admits, yeah, I did it. Screwed the team. I just didn't want to screw up my summer. Phil admits he didn't care and doesn't care now, which is rare for a coach. And Michael calls Scottie selfish or says the act was selfish. Did any of that surprise you, how unvarnished all those reactions were? Or did you already know all that stuff?
Well, I knew, I knew that was how each person would answer. That was part of Phil's genius, was he gave players so much space and he understood players because he was one of us, having played in the league for I think 10 plus years. and having won championships with the Knicks and having felt the difficulty of being an NBA basketball player, physically, mentally, everything. So Phil handled that stuff better than any coach that I had ever had. And he just understood that sometimes in order to get the most out of a player, you have to concede certain things. And he knew Scotty would be much better served giving him that space and giving him that right to protest. And that Scotty would, as a result, turn around and come back to the team and give everything he had for us, at the end of the year.
I've always, I was watching it last night with my wife, and as the Scotty episode started, she asked me, where does Scotty rank all time amongst players? And she was surprised that he wasn't in the top 10. I mean, I don't think he's close to the top 10, but I gave a ballpark number that was surprised with how low, and she was surprised how low it was. But one thing I did say was, I've always respected how Michael goes out of his way to tell everyone, because Michael is like, pathological, does not compliment easily. The one guy he compliments all the time is Scotty, and goes out of his way to say, I never would have done any of this without Scotty. And I think, look, you can't prove a negative. He didn't ever win without Scotty, but they fit together so well. And because it's Michael and because he delivers praise with such reticence, it's always been touching to me that he goes out of his way to shower Scotty with that praise.
Well, number one, it's deserved. Scotty was an incredible basketball player, and I think underrated at this point. And I think he would have been so good in the modern game. He could. He would have guarded 1 through 5 every single game. There's not a 5-man in the league now who he couldn't have guarded, and every point guard in pick and roll, he would have been able to stay in front of, use his arms. The driving lanes that would have opened up, his passing ability. Scotty was a brilliant basketball player. And I think one of the reasons Scotty was beloved, not only by Michael, but all of us, is because he was such a perfect complement to Michael. Michael was the hard ass. He was the guy who was coming at you, and you had to be ready every single day. For his criticism, for his force, his intimidation. And Scotty was the one who balanced everything out. He was the guy who'd put his arm around you and make sure you were okay, with all the difficulty that you had to face being a member of that team. So Scotty was beloved by everybody, including Michael, but he was also just a phenomenal basketball player.
There's something very sweet about Scotty's voice. That sounds very cheesy to say. And his brother, who was interviewed in the documentary, talks there's something about their voices that is very sweet and lets you know this guy's he's gonna be nice to you. He's gonna be a nice guy. It sounds cheesy to say, but it just stands out to me.
Again, teammates loved him. He had that presence of a dominant player, but he was just a kind soul. You felt what a good person he was every single day. And he made his mistakes. There was the playoff game the year Michael was out, where he literally took himself out of the game. And it was one of the most unfortunate things ever, because I think it really hurt his reputation going forward as a teammate, as a person. Everybody who didn't know him just automatically said, "Oh, that guy's selfish." But the reality was he was one of the most unselfish teammates that I ever had, and that incident, more than anything to me, just showed how vulnerable he was, which we all are. It showed how human he was. And I think that was one of the reasons he was such a good compliment to Michael, because Michael seemed inhuman half the time.
I've always gravitated towards, like, Michael. I grew up as a Celtics fan because my dad is a Celtics fan, and I always gravitated toward McHale more than Bird, because McHale seemed like a normal person, and Bird is like Michael in that he's just a pathological competitor. I couldn't relate to him. I can't relate to guys like that. I relate to the fallible guys, the guys that get a little emotional. And you brought up the 94 series against the Knicks where he sits out and Kukoc hits the shot. I was reading some old clips of that for various reasons last week, and I was surprised how in the press the day after, 2 days after, Scotty was like completely unapologetic. He said, I would do it again. You know, this has been my team. I deserve to take that shot. I stand by what I did. I know it upset people. Cartwright crying is a famous anecdote. But I was surprised. Like, Scotty didn't back up. Maybe now he's backed off of it a little bit, but then he was like, no, I'm at peace with what I did.
Yeah, and then he came out and he balled out in Game 6 and was the dominant player in the game. And then we took the series to 7. So he was unbelievably confident in his game. And I thought that season he might get MVP. That was the first year Michael missed when he went to play baseball. I think Hakeem win it? 94? David Robinson, maybe?
I don't know who. David Robinson won it in 95 because that's when Hakeem destroys him in the playoffs as sort of an MVP. Yeah. I think Olajuwon won it in 94. I think you're right.
Yeah. So I think Scotty was right there, neck and neck. And if I remember correctly, you know, we won 55 games in 93, 94 without Michael. And Scotty was the main reason. We had great veterans. We had guys like B.J. Armstrong, and we had John Paxson, Bill Cartwright. We had guys who had been there through the first run. Scott Williams. So you had a group that still had that championship mentality. So they knew how to win, but Scotty was the guy who made it all work.
Have you ever confronted Hugh Hollins in person for his foul call in Game 5? You got to. I was mad about it at the time. Yeah. I'm still mad about it.
I think what made me the most mad, it was you're referring to his foul call on Hubert Davis's jump shot with about I think it was 2 seconds left.
Game was tied. Was it tied?
I think we were up 1.
You were up 1.
We were up 1. Yeah, and.
And it's Game 5, so you're about to go up three games to 2, I believe, right?
Yeah, the home team has won every game to that point, but we're about to break through and have a chance to go home, for Game 6. And Hubert takes a jumper about an 18-footer foul line, and the ball. I remember there was a picture the next day, like in the paper, where his hand he's holding his follow through, and the ball is already halfway to the basket, and Scotty's arm is still a foot away from Hubert's arm. And a split second later, Scotty ends up hitting his arm on the follow through, but it was after the ball already hit the rim. And this was a time when the league did not protect shooters. And what I was so upset about was, I couldn't tell you how many times as a shooter back then in that era, that season, guys would run into me after the shot, and I'd complain to the ref, and automatically the ref would say, doesn't matter, it was after the release, because that was the rule back then. And then with the game on the line, they call that foul which is clearly after the release. That was a tough one to swallow. I give Hubert a lot of credit, though. He stepped up and made 2 enormous free throws to win the game under a lot of pressure. That was nuts.
You mentioned Scotty's defense. Let's talk about the 2 finals against the Jazz. The very different series. I've watched a lot of both of them in the last couple weeks. And so everyone knows Stockton Malone pick and roll. That's what they default to. They run it on the left wing a lot. And Scotty is usually on the weak side, guarding a Shandon Anderson or a Chris Morris. They even stashed him on Antoine Carr here and there. And his rotations from the weak side to the ball side, he's like everywhere. And the series became like the Jazz adjusted by having his guy cut back door towards the rim. Shandon Anderson was good at that, but like Scotty, obviously it's an exaggeration, but it does seem like he's in like 3 different places at once. He's fucking up their pick and roll. He's on the back line. Like his defense in that series is on that action is like, it's incredible to watch. I urge people to go back and watch how much ground he is covering and how he moves ahead of the play. It's really, that was like a little game within the game.
He just guarded everybody. He was the best center fielder I've ever seen. And, I remember in that series, he would guard the weak side. He would come over to help off of his man to clog up the lane with Malone and Stockton, but back then you couldn't do what you can do now in terms of double team a guy who didn't have the ball. And so the illegal defense rules were much tougher back then. So if you committed, you had to keep going to the ball and go all the way to double team. Otherwise it was illegal. And Scotty was so smart and so rangy and fast. He found a way to do it without committing an illegal defense infraction. And then we just moved him around. Whoever was hot. I remember, I think it was 98. Howard Isley got going in game 2, and I was guarding Howard. And, our biggest concern obviously was Karl Malone and Stockton, but Howard came in, knocked down like 4 jumpers in a row. He got rolling. And I remember Phil just said, you guys switch. And, Scotty went over and took Howard for a couple possessions, and I went and guarded somebody else. That was always our response to everything. We would just, have Scotty take care of the problem.
Now, let's start with the Last Dance finals, because the thing is the Last Dance. Game 1, Utah wins, goes up 1-0. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things about that game, rewatching it, is Scotty hits a 3 from the top of the arc to tie the game late. And Michael is mad because Michael was on a roll and Michael wanted the ball. And Utah calls a timeout, and Michael and Scotty are yapping at each other the whole time. And Costas is on TV saying, what an alpha competitor. But his teammate just made a 3 and Michael's mad at him. And the next possession, Scotty jacks a 3 early in the shot clock. And it felt to me like, oh, you don't think I'm going to shoot this free? Do you remember at all them going at it? You don't remember that at all, huh?
I don't remember that. I mean, I haven't watched, a ton of that series since then. So a lot of that stuff has blended into the background. I did, the detail segment on game 2, recently. I think it'll be coming out soon on ESPN. I watched game 2 and kind of broke that one down, for detail, but I haven't watched any of the other games from the series. But there was always a lot of communication between Michael and Scotty, and frequently, it was heated, but never in a disrespectful manner. It was always just, with the intention of trying to win the game.
Stockton seals game 1 with a very tough runner, right over you, right? Like elbow in your face kind of. Can you picture that still?
I remember that. Yeah. I was, we were trying to send everything to the sideline. We called it blue back then. Now most teams call it ice, where the defender on the ball jumps on the high side, sends him down towards the baseline. The big kind of weights down there for him. So we were trying to do that, and I couldn't quite get Stockton to his left towards the sideline. He ended up getting back over the screen. I tried to get back in position to beat him to that spot, but he got to the middle and hit a tough runner, and that pretty much sealed the game. So not a lot of sleep for me that night.
So you're down 1-0 in a perfect bookend of Michael's career. The only other finals he was ever down 1-0 was the very first one against the Lakers, where the Lakers win game 1. So an unfamiliar position, even though you're on the road, Utah's a great team. You're going into game 2. It's not a must win because you have 3 coming up at home, and you're the freaking Chicago Bulls. You have Michael Jordan. But is there a different vibe going into that game down 1-0, or are you guys just as poised as can be because of the kind of team that you are?
Well, we are definitely poised because of the team we were. But you always want to split on the road, in a playoff series. Going down 2-0 is really tough. So we needed that game pretty badly, and yet we'd been there before. We felt confident, and so I thought we handled our business pretty well.
So I'm going to take you back to the last minute of that game because it features a key Steve Kerr sequence that we were texting about because I was so delighted to see it. Hornacek hits a 3 to put Utah up by 1 with like a minute and change to go. That's it. You're on the verge of being down 2-0. It's a huge monster Jeff Hornacek shot. And Jeff Hornacek had a tough series. He was injured. It was a really tough matchup for him. Kukoc then gets a steal. Go ahead.
He had a great game too, though. Jeff did. I remember.
He did.
Yeah, especially the second half. He had struggled in game one. I mean, he had to guard Michael Jordan. That was part of the matchup difficulty for Utah was they had a small backcourt. They had a great backcourt with Stockton and Hornacek, but it was relatively small backcourt. And because of the matchups, Jeff had to guard Michael often in that series, and it had to take a lot out of him.
Yeah, and Utah ends up going with 2 or 3 of Shandon Anderson, Chris Morris, right. Byron Russell on the floor. Okay, so here's what happens. They're up by 1. They come down with the ball again with like maybe less than a minute to go. Chance to really, put the hammer down. Stockton pick and roll. Kukoc makes a great steal on the weak side, and you're running in a 2-on-1 with Jordan, or like a 2-on-1.5 with Jordan ahead of you. And here comes Steve Kerr on the right wing with 55 seconds to go, down 1 in the NBA Finals with Michael Jordan with him. And and Malone is on you, and Malone's backpedaling. You have space. And I had no memory of this. Steve Kerr jacks a 3 to put Chicago up by 2 and misses. And the ball comes right back to you for what I assume is the biggest offensive rebound of your life. And you dish to Michael, who lays it in for an and 1. So I need to ask you, if you don't get that offensive rebound, does Michael at that point trust you enough that you're not going to get reamed? Or if you lose that game, are you going to get reamed?
I don't think so. I think with Michael, you get reamed if you don't take the shot. And if you take the shot, he's good with it. And he knew that was a good shot because
Malone. By the way, I'm not making fun of you. It was a good shot. You were open.
Yeah. I was open. I had a 3, and Malone backed up, but as soon as I let it go, I knew I missed it. I kind of pulled the string a little bit. I had taken a 3 a couple minutes before. There was a hair long, and I felt it. And so on that one, I over adjusted, and as soon as I let it go, I'm like, gosh, it's short. But because it was short, I got the first move on the offensive board before I think it was maybe Hornacek and Malone were back there. So I kind of got the first run at it and was able to get the rebound. And at that point, that was an easy choice. Just hand the ball to the greatest player of all time.
Well, and I have to say, you make this play. It's really a series of plays. It's a shot, a rebound, and a pass. And you don't have too many iconic rebounds and iconic assists in your career. You're a shooter more than anything else. And Michael makes it, and it's an and 1, and he has a chance to put you guys up by 2 in a huge NBA Finals game. You just put your head down and start jogging toward half court like nothing happened. If that were me, I would have been hugging Michael. I would have been pumping. You just it's like a pickup game. You had no emotional display at all.
I was scared to death of the next play. And that's the thing in those games in the finals. You just move on to the next play constantly. And there's this buildup of emotion. I mean, there's a reason you go absolutely bonkers when the series is over and you've won. There's a reason for that, the champagne flowing and, going nuts in the locker room. There's so much emotion that's pent up, but you can't expend any of it during the game because you got to turn your attention to the next play. And it felt even different watching game 2 when I did that last week. Having coached now for the last 6 years in the NBA, how wide open the game is, how free flowing it is. I was nervous watching game 2. I felt the tension. It seemed like every possession was just an absolute grind. It seemed like a miracle when anybody made a shot. And I got uncomfortable. I'm like, this is such a horrible feeling, like to play basketball this way. Like you're nervous all the time. And I don't know. That's how it felt during those finals because of the style of play and because every possession mattered so much. It was tough to really let loose and just go and just play.
It's actually it's interesting from your perspective in another way. It's one of the more offense-defense substitution series ever. And and Phil did this in every round. But you and Harper are constantly going in and out for each other for offense-defense. Kukoc and Rodman are very frequently going out offense-defense. And on the other end, you mentioned Hornacek. Hornacek is in and out all the time for offense. Was that hard? I mean, by that time you're used to it. You know what your strengths are. You know what Harp's strengths are. But is it hard to go in for 10 seconds, out for a minute, in for another 30 seconds?
No, not really. Especially, that was kind of my role anyway. I didn't start. I was kind of a 20-minute a night guy. And so I was used to, going in and out of the rotation. But in a playoff game, I mean, anything goes. And I think, in the regular season, you wouldn't see that level of offense defense. So once you get into the playoffs, especially in the finals, it's like, whatever, you just go with the flow.
I actually think those Bulls are underrated in how many different kind of lineups and identities they can play. So you start, for most of the year, you start Rodman, Longley. Then you have this lineup like, I don't know how anybody guarded the lineup of you, Michael, Scotty, Kukoc, Rodman at center. Like, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous lineup. And then to close game 4, which is the pivotal game of the 98 finals, I think, Chicago mostly goes Harper, Michael, Scotty Burrell as like a small ball 4, I guess, and Rodman. It's like, how are you scoring on it? It's like that, but that first lineup with you and Kukoc, that's kind of your all offense group, and Dennis is at center. Right. That's a very modern lineup. And in fact, Dennis at times looks like Draymond Green does now, right, having the ball in the post and having cutters going all around him and split actions and stuff. Right? I mean, that you can clearly see the lineage from that to now.
Yeah, no question. Dennis in today's game would be a center. He'd be a starting center, and he would have no problem guarding anybody in the league. And he would be, the best in the league at switching onto guards and staying in front. You're right. He would be Draymond Green. It's a perfect analogy. And the thing that, people always ask me all the time, who would win between the Warriors, the modern Warriors and the 96 Bulls, 98 Bulls, whatever. And those debates are always impossible because the rules are different and the game's different, all that stuff. But what I will say is those Bulls teams were actually built for the modern game. Yeah. And you just kind of pointed it out. But when you had Harper, Pippen, Jordan, Kukoc, Rodman, 5 guys who were all 6'6" to 6'10", all could handle the ball, all could pass, all could guard multiple spots. It was unbelievable.
It's not small ball. Like, that's not a small lineup. It's just versatile ball. It's just whatever you want to call it.
It's what we're all trying to do today. It's what we're all trying to accomplish today in the NBA is find 5 guys who are 6'7", long-armed, who can make plays, who can all play basketball. And ideally, you want even more three-point shooting today. We didn't shoot a ton of threes back then. Nobody did. But that lineup would be amazing today. And by the way, Tony Kukoc, he was so good, and I'm glad that he's getting his due, or that he's going to get his due. I assume in this documentary, we didn't see a whole lot of him in the first episodes.
Yeah, Mike, you saw Michael yelling at him in practice, which is I assume is a thing that happened frequently.
Yeah, for sure. But I think, I don't know. He was so good and so skilled at 6'11" as a dribbler, passer, shooter. His nickname was the Waiter in Europe before he came over here because he was such a great passer. He just served everybody. I hope people are able to recognize the brilliance of his game, because if he played today, he'd be an all-star. He would be so well thought of because his game is perfectly suited to what we're seeing now.
Now more than ever, we have to look out for each other and count on each other. Marathon wants you to know that you can count on them for the high-quality, top-tier gas. Marathon gasolines are formulated with STP additives. They keep your vehicle running at peak performance by optimizing fuel economy, removing those ugly deposit buildups, and reducing emissions. And right now, you can get 5 cents off every gallon every day with Make It Count rewards from Marathon. Plus, you can earn points for additional savings on fuel, airfare, hotels, and more. This is definitely a deal you can count on. It's quick and easy to join. Just download the free Make It Count app or go to makeitcount.com/radio and start saving today. Offer is valid only at participating Marathon stations. Remember, wherever you need to go, be safe. The people at Marathon are behind you all the way. So the game that I watched most closely from your playoff run is Game 7 against the Pacers in the conference finals. And because that's a game that I've always wanted an excuse to revisit, and now I have it. And you don't win that game without Kukoc. Kukoc has 21 points in that game. He has a run of 5 straight jumpers in the third quarter that gives you guys a lead. And if you talk to some of the Pacers that were on that team, they talk about, look, Chicago won that series with offensive rebounds and free throws and all that, but they really gave us problems when they went with Kukoc and Rodman because they were just too mobile for us, and Tony stretched us out too far. Like that's the stuff that won you that series.
That Pacers team was awesome. They were a really kind of an old school NBA team, you know, on their front line. They had Rick Smits at 7'4" posting up. They had the Davis boys, you know, Antonio Davis and Dale, just knocking you all over the paint. They were physical. But because of that combo that you said, Rodman and Kukoc able to step out and play the 4 and the 5, I felt like that was a lineup that was tough for Indiana to deal with. But yeah, that was an amazing series. The home team won every game in that series. Indiana was great. Reggie Miller and I have talked about that series many times over the years. Tough series, and probably the most vulnerable, you know, that the Bulls ever were in that last three-peat.
This is the kind of question that's always unfair, and it's particularly unfair when it's 22 years later. But I wonder if you remember anything from between games 6 and 7 of that series, because as you said, Michael only went to 2 Game 7s in the 6 title runs. Chicago only went to 2 Game 7s. One was against the Knicks in 92, and the Bulls won by 1,000,000 points. This one, though, so it's all these years later. It's a team that has played you 1,000,000 times, and you know the game's going to be close, and you know they can beat you. Was there anything different about the vibe of the team or the pregame speech or anything going into that game, or was it just, let's just lock in and play?
I remember the day before the game, we had our walkthrough, our practice, and I remember Phil called us in, and in typical Phil fashion, he's trying to get our minds right. He said, you know, the important thing in a game like this is to not fear losing. You know, you embrace the idea that you could lose. You know, it's okay. You face that. And so he was kind of, you know, getting into this psychological spirit of how to approach the game. But before he could even really get started, Michael just said, "No, f that, Phil. We're not losing." And then we all put our hands in the middle. 1, 2, 3 Bulls. Everybody went home. And then we showed up at the arena the next day.
Michael had a way of cutting things short, I guess. I was laughing last night in the first episode where you guys start 0-4 on the road, and you're at the Clippers, and Michael in the huddle is like, all right, let's get this first road win. I'm fucking tired of saying this. I'm not saying this again. Let's go out and win. Game 4 of the 98 finals, you guys win. You go up 3-1. And even though Utah has home court in that series, I always feel like that's the gut punch. When you get 3-1, that's the gut punch.
Yeah.
And that stretch run of that game is so ridiculous. Rodman goes 4 of 4 at the foul line. Rodman, every free throw felt like you had no idea where it was going to go. Twice in the last 3 minutes, just trucks Karl Malone under the basket for offensive rebounds and draws fouls. Hits all 4 free throws, and you guys go on to win the game. Michael is also destroying Shandon Anderson this whole time. Do you remember those Rodman free throws? I mean, he's like shrugging and laughing after half of them.
And he's moving all over the place too. Like you don't know which way he's going to move on his free throw. He's kind of all fluid, and it's nervous energy. So before he gets the ball, he's kind of walking around. He's looking into the crowd. He's making these gestures with his hands, and then as he shoots, he kind of steps over the line, and maybe he veers to the right or veers to the left, and the ball goes in, and he does like this prayer motion, and then he laughs. And it was like a show in and of itself, his free throw. And I do remember that. He made 4 consecutive.
4 in a row.
Yeah, when we had to have them. And that was, you're right, that was the gut punch, because game 3, I believe we won. Like it was like 90 something to 54.
Yeah, game
right?
3 is the series where you think, the Jazz are the Jazz are just now falling apart because they get destroyed by 40 something, and then they come back and they play tough from them. But yeah, game 4 is after that.
That was So game 3 was such a blowout, and so we knew, given how good Utah was, we knew that Game 4 was the one where they were going to come back and respond, and they did. They were always a very physical team, a tough team mentally. They reflected Jerry Sloan in that way. They were going to fight for everything, and so that game was tough the whole way. And then for Dennis to seal it with free throws down the stretch was kind of hilarious, but also very relieving for all of us. I mean, that was the key game.
Game 6 is obviously the last shot, the Byron Russell arms extended shot. There was one shot from the stretch run of that game that I had forgotten. By stretch run, I mean last 2-3 minutes. With the shot clock, I don't know, I can't remember what the score is. My notes are all crazy. They're everywhere. It's a close game. Shot clock is winding down. Ron Harper from the right wing just sort of meanders into this crazy leaning floater at the shot clock buzzer and makes it. And it's just like, you just need some shots like that, right? And it's probably for late career Ron Harper a 20% shot. And he makes it. I think it ties the game or puts you up one. I don't have my notes in front of me right now. Do you remember that shot at all?
I do. I had remembered it being earlier, not at the end of the game, but maybe earlier in the fourth, but I may be wrong. What I do remember about that shot, it was clearly after the shot clock buzzer went off. We got really lucky on that play. It was before replay. The refs counted it, and when they showed the replay on TV, it was clearly in his hand when the buzzer went off. So that was a huge break for us.
It was a big shot by Ron Harper anyway. And then Michael, of course, goes 6 points in 50 seconds. He draws 2 free throws, makes them both, hits a leaner, I think, and then hits the Russell shot and steals the ball from Carmel. It's the most ridiculous finish I mean, it's not a finish to his career, but it's his finish to his Bulls career. It's astonishing to watch him just say, nope, this is our game. We're taking the game.
Yeah. And I think it was the perfect, sort of, metaphor or perfect, it sort of perfectly encapsulated who Michael is and was, in terms of his position in the league. Like, he just completely took over the final minute of the finals against, the best team we faced. And that's just who he was. He dominated every aspect of not only the game, but the entire league. And I think that's probably the hardest thing for young fans and young NBA players who never saw him play. It's probably the hardest thing for them to understand is just how dominant he was in every respect. People were so intimidated by him. Other coaches, the referees, his teammates. I mean, he sort of lorded over everything in the league. And that game, like I said, it perfectly captured that.
He was not going to miss that shot. I remember watching it. I remember exactly where I was. I remember watching it with my dad. We were both cheering for Utah simply out of, I felt pity for all these players who were never going to win a championship. And he got that shot up. You didn't even need to watch it. It was going in. There was no question it was going in. However, my favorite finals of the 6 finals is 1997. I love that finals. It's ugly as all hell. It's close. It's competitive, but it's my favorite finals because it's 2-2 and there's a real moment of tension in that series that I don't care if the Bulls are up, don't have home court. If they're up 3-1, Michael is not losing 3 games in a row. That series 97, it's also a crazy series. It's game 1. The mailman doesn't deliver on Sunday and then Michael hits a buzzer beater. Game 4 is a crazy game that we can talk about. It's the Utah ties it, and there's the famous full court pass from Stockton to Malone late in the game. And game 5 is the flu game, which is honestly, if you ask me as just a sports fan, what sporting event do you look back on and just get the most goosebumps or the most butterflies in your stomach? There are only 2 candidates for me. Number 1 is that game. And I watched it with my dad, and we're just looking at each other on the couch like, this is just, we'll never see anything like this again, just giddiness. And the only other one that compares to that, I still think it's the greatest game in any sport I've ever seen, is Duke, Kentucky from the tournament when Leitner hits the shot. That one was, but you've been asked about it a million times. Give me the flu game story. Give me the flu game from the perspective of Steve Kerr. It's my favorite NBA game ever, maybe. Well,
what I remember is that we had to make a choice at the beginning of the the series of where to stay. We were either going to stay in a 5-star hotel in Park City or some cheap hotel in Salt Lake, because there was a convention and all the nice hotels in the city were taken. And Michael was like the only one who wanted to stay in the city. Everybody wanted to stay at the nice place in Park City and kind of get away from everything. And somehow, Michael ended up not making that decision. The rest of the guys kind of said, no, let's stay up there. And he was not thrilled. So fast forward to the night before the game, and he's sick as a dog, and there's rumors that it's altitude sickness, and we're all feeling like, oh my God, we forced him to stay up at the Park City Hotel, and it's like, what are we doing? We're idiots. And so we had a shoot around. We didn't drive down to Salt Lake for shoot around the day of the game. We stayed up at a high school in Park City. We went to the shoot around. He either stayed at the hotel or he went to the high school and went in the back and had an IV, but he was deathly ill. And nobody really seemed to know what it was, whether it was food poisoning or the flu or altitude sickness, but he was a mess. And so that's the backdrop for the game. We were all concerned if he was even going to play or not. And then, of course, he not only plays, but dominates the game, and the rest is history.
I was actually going to say, I think it's not an underrated game because it's maybe the most famous, one of the top 5 most famous individual performances ever. But people just remember the image of him draped on Scotty and like just willing himself through this illness. Like you think, oh yeah, he had a good game. Like it was a really heroic performance just to have a good game. Like a good game. Then you look at the box score. 38 points on 13 of 27 from the floor, 10 of 12 from the line, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, a block, 44 minutes and 17 seconds of playing time. It's like, it's just insane. Like, I just don't know what else to say.
Inhuman. And yet that was the norm for him. That's what I'm talking about when I try to explain his dominance. It went so far beyond what a great basketball player he was. He just seemed invulnerable. And even on a night when it looked like he was on his deathbed, for him to summon that kind of performance was just vintage MJ.
There was also that both series, Utah would always have these droughts in like the first 5 minutes of the fourth quarter where sometimes Stockton and Malone would be sitting together or one of them would say, like, it's particularly in 98, they would just not score for 4 or 5 minutes. Yeah. Like routinely they would get shut out. Like the defense was just incredible. I don't know if you remember that, but like when their bench lineup at the beginning of the fourth quarter the score of those games for like, from the 12-minute mark to the 7-minute mark of the fourth quarter would quite often be like 4-2. It was just such a slugfest.
Yeah. I remember a few years after I retired, I was doing TV. I ran into Jeff Van Gundy, who has since become a great friend. But we started talking. He was doing television, and we ran into each other at a game. We started talking about the Bulls-Knicks and what a great rivalry it was. And he said, everyone always talked about the triangle offense. And he said, to me, the triangle, it was whatever. It was good offense. Michael Jordan would have been good in any offense. He said the whole thing playing against the Bulls it was impossible to score. He said that team was so good defensively, and that's what gets lost in the retelling of the story. And I agree with Jeff, and especially with that starting group out there. I mean, Ron Harper had never played point guard in his career. He was always a wing. He was always a scorer. But for that team, he became the de facto starting one. Scotty really handled the ball more, and everyone handles it in the triangle. But Ron guarded the point guard. He guarded John Stockton in that series. He'd guard whatever point guard we had to deal with. And that set such a tone because remember, we had to get by Orlando That was the team with Penny and Shaq and Dennis Scott, Nick Anderson. That was the team that knocked us out of the 95 playoffs when Michael was out. And so the lineup we threw out there with that size, with Harp, MJ, Scotty, Rodman, and then, pick a guy, whether it's Longley to guard the big guy or Kukoc to guard another wing. That was an impossible group to score on. And you said it in that series for Utah, there were moments where they just couldn't get a hoop, and that was the difference.
They're also, the grit of those teams really stands out, because if you watch from Game 7 of the Pacers series in 98, the Last Dance season, through the Utah series, I'm just going to ballpark it. There are 10 pivotal offensive rebounds that the Bulls get, and not just Rodman, that the Bulls get just by outworking the other team. It's just sheer physicality and effort and grit. And it was like, just the toughness of those teams was like the beauty of watching MJ and all that. But like, I'm telling you, it's 8 to 10 offensive rebounds. There's like 5 alone in the Pacers game, where it's nothing fancy. It's just, they worked harder. They worked harder than Rick Smits. They worked harder than whoever was out there. It was just work.
I think that's why Rodman was such a key for that team, because he added to that dimension in the front court that we lacked, that speed and grit, the tenacity. Horace Grant had provided that for the team on the first three-peat, and then we had a hole there in that spot, and so Dennis came in and filled that hole. And when you just added the pieces together, the athleticism, the length, the tenacity of Dennis, Scotty, Michael, and you start talking about offensive boards, loose balls, a late rotation, close out to a shooter, and all that stuff just adds up over 48 minutes. And that combination of all those guys was just too much for people to handle.
Game 6, the clincher. You hit the jump shot that essentially wins the Bulls the championship. Long two, shameful long two. I don't know what you were thinking coming into 2-point range, really. And you've told the story many times that Michael has said to you, as he said to other shooters, just be ready. If they come to me, be ready. I think Jim Gray was doing sideline for that game. And these sideline reporters in 1998, it's like they're in the huddle based on what they're reporting. It's crazy. So Jim Gray comes out, the broadcast comes back, and Jim Gray says, Michael in the huddle says, just give the ball to me. Give me the ball. Just give me the ball. But he's also, I guess, telling you to be ready. But so do you remember Michael in the huddle just saying, like, just whatever the play is, just give it to me?
Yeah, I remember that. And then kind of near the end of the huddle, he kind of whispered, he kind of like made eye contact with me, and he put his hand over his mouth and he said, hey, be ready. Stockton's going to come double team me. And he was, you could see his mind working. And I want to say it was game 4 in Salt Lake when Stockton had come over to double team him and actually made a steal. And that may have led to the long pass to Malone for the clinching lay-in. So I think Michael was thinking about that particular play from game 4. And as he thought about it, he said, all right, it said in his mind, Stockton's going to come double. And that's when he kind of nudged me and said, be ready.
Do you know what was going in?
No. I knew I was going to shoot it. I walked out there, and, it's one of those moments where you're kind of like, oh, you can't think, right? You just have to, you just have to say, let it go, let it fly. And so the whole thing unfolded exactly as Michael had predicted. And you could see Michael almost timing his dribble and, recognizing Stockton coming over to him. And I just tried to step into the gap and actually got an easier look because of how far John went to go double Michael. I stepped in and made it like a 16-footer instead of a 20-footer, just to make the shot a little easier. And I had made my mind up I was going to shoot it. And but yeah, when it left my hand, it did feel good.
It felt good. Yeah. Another thing so game 4, you mentioned Stockton doubling him. So Game 4 goes like this. Stockton, they get a rebound. Stockton throws the crazy full court pass to Karl Malone, which is one of the all-time great NBA passes. Malone lays it in. Utah's up by 1 with like a minute, maybe a minute, like almost a minute flat. The next Chicago possession, I believe, Michael has the ball at the top of the key. Stockton shades away from you. You're in the right corner, and Michael passes you the ball, and you have a great look, and you miss it. And I know I've talked to enough shooters. I know you can close your eyes and picture that shot, and I know you're probably really, really glad that you got that shot in Game 6, because that would have put Chicago up 2 with like 40 seconds left, and you could have had a 3-1 lead. Like can you see that shot in your mind's eye?
Oh, I remember it. And I remember there was a timeout right after that, and I came to the bench, and I was sitting on the bench, and I'm hanging my head and cussing myself out for missing the shot. And I remember Michael, he kind of admonished me. He's like, "Hey, get your head up, get your head up, next play." And he was right, because I was beating myself up just because I knew I had such a good look and it was such a big moment, but, had to move on.
Malone on the next Utah possession, so they're up 1. Malone gets fouled and makes 2 free throws, which is a big deal because of what happened in Game 1 where he goes 0-2 in a tie game. So 2 questions. Number 1, the mailman doesn't deliver on Sunday. Are you guys like yucking it up in the locker room about that after the game? Did Scotty tell I don't remember how like immediate and widespread that story was.
Oh, we were laughing in the locker room right afterwards because he told everybody. We saw him walk over to Karl and whisper something, and so after the game, one of our guys said, "Well, what'd you say?" And when he told everybody what he said, everybody burst out laughing, and pretty good line, and that was an amazing finish. I mean, we were lucky to win that game because if he makes those 2 free throws, I think it was a tie game when he missed them both, if I'm not mistaken. It was
a tie game. I mean, those are down 1. You could at least say, well, we were down 1. We might have lost anyway. Tie game, and you missed 2 free throws. I think there was 9 seconds left.
Right.
That's a big old matzo ball floating there. That's a bad one.
Big one. And then Michael hit the game winner at the buzzer, right? Was that the buzzer beater on the next?
Yes, with the fist pump. Like I don't know how the guy looks so cool. It's like the guy can he looks cool folding his laundry in episode 1 of the documentary. Like how many times has everyone tried to imitate that fist pump? You can't do it. It's just Michael. It's just the way it was.
I think my favorite line from the first episode was James Worthy saying, "I was better than him for about 2 weeks."
I'll tell you what, that was a very good one. I'll tell you what my favorite line was. I'd ask him, what did he say? It depends how bad the fucking headache is. Yes. That was my favorite. Which is, exactly. Which is really, it's unclear to me now if Michael at age 50, whatever, actually still would react that way. Because it is, I want to say this politely. It's a very, very bad decision. If there's a 10% chance you're going to die, you should definitely not, like Jerry Reinsdorf was right. I wonder if today there would have been like a 0% chance Michael plays in the playoffs that year. Don't you think like there's just no way an 8th seed is going to let him on the court?
Yeah. No way. Different time, different era for sure.
The Lowe Post coverage of The Last Dance is brought to you by State Farm. When you want the real deal, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Coverage is also brought to you by AT&T. There was one other thing I wanted to ask you about Game 4 that I've now forgotten. Oh, Game 4, after Karl goes 2 of 2 from the line, you're down 3 in 97. Okay. Michael comes down and takes a really difficult 3. Can't really get separation from Russell because Michael's getting up there now. He rises up, and it's a leaning, fading, and it rattles in and out and hits the backboard. And I'm watching it, and I'm like, damn, that dude that's a millimeter away from being a ridiculous game-tying shot.
And he did the exact same thing in Game 6 at Indiana in the conference finals. I think it was Game 6. Maybe it was Game 4. But he would routinely take and make or nearly make just crazy game-winning shots. He was completely fearless and had the ability athletically to just get off a shot at any time, even under seemingly impossible conditions. But that was one of the things I admired about him the most, is just his willingness to miss, and most players they probably wouldn't admit it, but most players aren't really willing to be the guy to miss,
He missed a lot, and
he missed plenty.
Yeah.
But he would talk about that and say, I think he had a whole commercial for Nike on how many, or maybe it was Gatorade, for how many game-winning shots he had missed. And it's funny. I mean, that was meaningful to me. Like, even as his teammate watching that commercial, I'm like, oh yeah, he's right. I had to get that wisdom from watching the commercial. He was right there in the locker room, but it's like, oh yeah, you're right. You have to put yourself out there. And I think that's, one of the things I admired the most about him was just his willingness to always lay everything on the line with the entire world watching, and yet just to perform with that much confidence. It's just an incredible spectacle.
There's one play that I want to ask you about, because I know you remember it. And it's one of those frozen moments to me when you rewatch the game where you're like, wow, was that a big play? Game 7 against the Pacers. I love this game, you can tell. Indiana's up in the fourth quarter with like 6 minutes to go, 77-74. And there's a jump ball. There's a jump ball between Rick Smits, who's like 7'3", and Michael Jordan, who is not 7'3". Please describe in your memory what happens after that.
Oh man, Reggie and I have talked about this one many times. It was a cross match in front of the Pacers bench. So we're shooting towards that hoop, and because Michael is jumping against Smits, all the matchups are all messed up. And somehow we won the jump ball. I can't remember exactly if Michael or Smits hit it, or maybe they both did, but we kind of scrambled and got the loose ball, but they were completely scrambled defensively. And so I got a wide open three at the top of the key and made it. And that was, I mean, as I was saying earlier, those games, you didn't get many open looks at all. The games were not fluid. It was more of a wrestling match back then. And so when you did get an open look, you felt like you had to knock it down. And that was probably the most wide open look I had the whole series.
It stands out because it's Smits against Jordan. If Smits can win that tip and they come down, let's say Reggie hits a three, or they get an and one, or it's going to be 79-74, 80-74 in that scenario. Like that's trouble. Then you're like, then it's okay. We really got to play not perfect, but really well in the last 5 minutes of the game. Instead, there's this chaos sequence and you hit a three and it's tied and the crowd's going crazy. It just stood out even rewatching it. I'd forgotten about it. It stood out as like, wow, that hurts. If I'm a Pacers fan seeing that again, whew, that hurts.
Yeah, that was one of the, looking back, it was, one of the maybe the scariest game we ever faced as a team, because it was a game 7. It was the only game 7, but it was also the quality of the opponent. They had a great team. Mark Jackson and Reggie in the backcourt. They had size and skill. They had great wing play with Derek McKee. Chris Mullen was late in his career, but still a lethal shooter. And then that front line that we talked about, big and physical. Larry Bird as their coach, Rick Carlisle, his right-hand man. It was a great team and a great series.
Yeah, you didn't want to go to the rim when the Davises were hanging around the rim.
No,
that was a scary. Last question. I'm going to let you go. We're going to be living with this team for the next 5 weeks. We're going to learn a lot about it. We're going to have our memories refreshed about a lot. Just you personally, whether it's in the documentary or not, is there a shareable for public consumption memory or something that you hold dear from that series that maybe isn't going to make the documentary, but for you it's something that you'll, other than the obvious stuff about, we won and this and that, is there a conversation, is there a relationship, is there something that from that particular season that you have really cherished for 20 whatever years?
Yeah, I think after we won, and after the parade and everything, we had a team dinner with our wives, and so it was just players, coaches, and wives. And I remember Phil took all the players over. It was just the guys, just the players, and we all kind of went around in a circle and toasted each other and said a few words about whatever was on our mind. And, everybody had a cigar and a drink in their hand, and it was surreal. Even though this whole thing had been laid out from before camp even started, like, this is it for this group. And we knew it all season. This truly was it. That was the last moment that we ever, were all together in one room. And it was really special. And it was one of Phil's, real strengths as a coach, one of his many strengths. He was a brilliant coach. But his ability to connect all of us in meaningful, powerful moments, concluded that night with a drink and a cigar and an incredibly emotional farewell. It was awesome.
Any toasts that you can remember that you could share or no?
What I shared was I said a toast to Tony Kukoc because of the what he faced coming over. It wasn't common back then for European players to come over to the league, and nobody had to go through what he did, which was the pressure from Michael and Scotty to earn his keep with the Bulls and to be Jerry's guy, because Jerry had drafted him in the second round and had touted him. So all of a sudden he shows up for practice. Michael and Scotty are all over him about being Jerry's guy. And poor Tony is just like, he just wants to play basketball. And so I said a toast to Tony because I just thought he was such a great player. And even today, I'm almost embarrassed. I see these graphics for The Last Dance, these promos, and they have Michael, Scotty, Dennis, Phil, and me. You know the ones I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I understand it. The reason I'm on there is because I'm the one who's famous because I'm a coach of the Warriors, and so people recognize me, and maybe people wouldn't recognize Tony Kukoc or Luke Longley or Ron Harper, or maybe their faces wouldn't mean as much to a young generation because this was 22 years ago. But that should really be Tony, I think, on that photo, on that promo, because he was an incredible player. And that night, I just wanted him to know how much he meant to our team.
Did you ever think we would get through a podcast without any questions about Kevin Durant or anything, or the Warriors? It's incredible. It's incredible. The Warriors don't forget the Warriors. We're talking about other stuff. Steve Kerr, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Please stay safe out there with your family. I really hope that I see you soon on the other side of this, whenever that is. But thank you for taking a little time. I look forward to the rest of the documentary, and it's always fun spending time with you. So please be safe and be well.
You too, Zach. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.